Okay, so when you picture ancient Egypt, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the towering pyramids, mysterious mummies, those iconic golden pharaohs? I mean, it's a civilization that just captivates us, right? An empire that lasted for an insane 3,000 years. So we're going to dive right in. We're going all the way back to the start to figure out just how this legendary kingdom even came to be. And think about it. All of those incredible things, the art, the temples, those massive statues, every single bit of it stands on a foundation built by just one single transformational event. And that event? The unification of Egypt. But how in the world do you take two totally separate lands and forge them into one of the most powerful empires history has ever known? Well, way before the first pharaoh ever showed up, Egypt wasn't Egypt, not as we know it anyway. It was actually two separate lands. And both of them were completely defined by the one thing that mattered most, the Nile River. We're not just talking about, geographical areas here. These were completely separate realms, with their own kings, their own cultures, even their own symbols. Okay, let's break this down. In the south, you've got Upper Egypt. Picture a long, skinny strip of green, fertile land just squeezed in between massive deserts. And its king, he wore this really distinct cone-shaped white crown. Then, up in the north, you had Lower Egypt. Totally different vibe. It was a wide, marshy delta where the Nile basically spreads out before it hits the Mediterranean Sea. And its ruler wore the red crown. So yeah, two lands, two crowns, two completely different worlds. Okay, and this is something that trips a lot of people up, so let's clear it up. Why is Upper Egypt in the south? It seems backwards, right? But it's actually super simple geography. The Nile River flows from the higher lands in Central Africa downhill to the north. So to go south, you literally have to travel up the river. See? The river defined absolutely everything for them, even how they thought about direction. So the big question is, how did these two very different lands become one kingdom? Well, for thousands of years, the ancient Egyptians had their own answer. They had an official story, a really powerful founding myth that was all about one single heroic figure. And the story goes something like this. A great king, his name was Menes, swept in, conquered the north, and brought the two lands together. He then founded the very first dynasty and became the first true pharaoh of Egypt. You can think of Menes as kind of like the George Washington of their civilization. For them, he was the ultimate founding father. But, history is never quite that simple, right? For historians, that neat, tidy story is just the beginning of a really fascinating detective case. It's time to put the legend to the side and start looking at the actual hard evidence they left behind. And this is where things get really mysterious. Was Menes even a real person? Or is that name just a stand-in for something a lot more complicated? Maybe it was the work of a few different rulers all mashed together into one legendary hero. To figure it out, we've got to follow the clues. So here's the key contrast you need to see. The name Menes, it only starts showing up in king lists and records written hundreds of years after this all supposedly happened. But when we look at actual artifacts from that exact time period, a different name pops up, Narmer. So a lot of scholars today think that Menes and Narmer might have been the same person. Or maybe Narmer was the real unifier, and his awesome deeds just got credited to this legendary Menes figure later on. And the single most important clue in this whole investigation, it's this thing right here, the Narmer palette. This ceremonial stone slab, which was found over 100 years ago, it's like a photograph from 5,000 years in the past. And man, does it tell a powerful story of conquest and unity. Honestly, this palette is a total masterclass in ancient political messaging. On one side, you see Narmer rocking the white crown of the south, standing victorious over his enemies. But then you flip it over, and there he is again, this time wearing the red crown of the north, looking over his new territory. The message is crystal clear. He's the undisputed boss of both lands. And this leads to the ultimate power move. Out of this whole unification thing came one of the most lasting symbols of power in all of history, the double crown, known as the pshent. By literally sticking the white crown and the red crown together, the pharaoh was making a statement every single day. He wasn't the king of Upper Egypt or the king of Lower Egypt. He was the king of the two lands, united as one. Okay, so we've dug into the who of it all, but the real legacy here is the why. Why did this one event matter so much? Because this wasn't just about winning a war. It was about creating a whole new way of looking at the world, a whole new cosmic and political order.
And to really get what the pharaoh's new job was, you have to understand this one crucial concept, Ma'at. Ma'at was basically the divine order of the entire universe. It meant truth, justice, balance, harmony, all of it. It was the force that made sure the sun came up, the Nile flooded on time, and the whole world didn't just fall apart into chaos. And that was the pharaoh's sacred duty. See, he wasn't just some political leader. He was the guy on Earth responsible for making sure Ma'at held up. His number one job was to maintain that cosmic balance. So uniting the two lands, that was seen as the ultimate act of bringing order from chaos. It was establishing Ma'at for the whole nation. Now, having this kind of divinely backed authority had huge practical effects. A single ruler could set up a central capital, Memphis, strategically placed right where the two lands met. He could organize huge numbers of people for massive building projects. He could collect taxes from the entire country and standardize everything from writing to art. This, my friends, was the birth of the state as we know it. So let's just zoom out for a second and look at the big picture here. This one event, this unification, it wasn't just some blip in history. It was the absolute bedrock. It was the foundation that the next 3,000 years of Egyptian civilization would be built on. And this quote really helps put it all in perspective. It's so easy for us to think of this as some dusty, ancient thing that happened a long time ago, but just imagine it happening today. You take two completely different neighboring lands and bring them under one government for the very first time. That wouldn't just change politics, right? It would shape their entire identity, their culture, their laws, the whole future of their society. And that's exactly what happened in Egypt.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the unification of Egypt was an absolutely pivotal moment in human history. It created one of the world's first big, centralized states. It established the super unique, godlike role of the pharaoh. It gave them the stability they needed to go out and build the pyramids. And it forged a national identity so strong it lasted for millennia. When you get right down to it, the story of Egypt's first pharaoh is this perfect mix of legend, memory, and straight-up detective work. It's a great reminder that history isn't always just a list of simple facts, you know? It's often a puzzle we're still trying to piece together. And that kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of the history we think we know is built on that very same mix of memory and mystery?